today. That's why I was a little late. The PowerPoint took a long time. I have it already, but I introduced the ayat also and their translation, so that really is very time-consuming for those who are familiar with the PowerPoint. In any case, first of all, the term naskh has been commonly translated into English as abrogation. I have my reservation on that translation, even though it's very common, but inshallah the reasons for that and the possible replacement or better term in my humble view will be forthcoming, inshallah. But on a basic level, really, the naskh or abrogation, as known in other community of faith, has nothing to do with the idea of Allah, hasha lillah, changed his mind. I don't want to go into biblical references and so on, so nobody think that we're trying to put down anyone. But I think for the sake, you see, in academia, there is no offense if you're quoting facts respectfully, but honestly as well. So that I'm trying to strike that balance. The example that we find, for example, in the Bible about God creating the humans, and when they did so much evil, it says that the Lord regretted that he created them. Of course, when you say regretted, it may imply that somehow he didn't expect that they will be that mischievous. Okay? This is only one example, but I'm not going to dwell on that. But it's for the sake of truth. This is why, as some Muslim scholars report, that among the Judaic people, the notion of God changing his mind is there, changing his mind. Or in another place it says that God sought to punish his servants because of their inequities, but again he changed that. So what I'm saying, that basically in Arabic term, that notion that existed before Islam, it's called bada'. You know where it came from? Bada'. بدا لله شيء لم يكن يعلمه. بدا له. يعني as if he has some deficient knowledge, but somehow he discovered something, so he started either regretting or changing his mind. For Muslim understanding of Tawheed and the divine attributes of Allah, that his knowledge is not limited to the past, but also the present and the future. There is nothing, an atom's weight in this universe except that he knows it. Just spontaneously came to my mind an ayah. وَمَا تَسْقُطُ مِنْ وَرَقَةٍ إِلَّا يَعْلَمُهَا وَلَا حَبَّةٍ فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْأَرْضِ وَلَا رَطْبٍ وَلَا يَابِسٍ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ. No leaf, even single leaf, falls from a tree except that he knows about it. There is nothing fresh or dry by way of plantation, except everything is in a book, which means the book of knowledge of Allah, of everything that was, is, or will be. There's no, I'm emphasizing that point, quite frankly, because there is a person that has been a colleague of mine in some presentations, particularly in Britain. I have great respect and love for him. But somehow he, in dealing with the question of qadr, and I'm not mentioning names here or anything, in dealing with the question of qadr, he came up with an idea, perhaps it came from earlier heretical thought among some Muslims, that Allah knows about it when it happens. You know, Allah has all broad knowledge of everything in the universe, but he knows about you doing it when it's happened. That is just, to me, is part of this bada' that has nothing to do with the concept of naskh. But this is just as a caution that this is not theoretical discussion or hardly academic. There are some thoughts like that, and I wanted to make this academic and hopefully honest, straightforward critique of it. All right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, of course, Bada assumes or implies one of two things. Either that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hasha Allah, did not have knowledge of something, so he changed his mind in some ruling or the other, or had knowledge but have some deficiency, neither of which is consistent with the concept of Tawheed. But even when we speak about Naskh, usually is defined as a ruling that has been superseded or changed by a later ruling on the same issue. Inshallah, we'll come to these technicalities. But even that, even if we admit that there is some area of Naskh, we'll get to that, inshallah. It is never in the divine revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of its core or basics. For example, notice here I'm not using message to a prophet, to all prophets, as a fundamental belief in Islam is that all of the prophets of Allah from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam share the basic core message. I find evidence to that in the Quran plentiful. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ. We have not sent any messenger except that he will be obeyed by the leave of Allah. By the leave of Allah. So there's consistent evidence that the core message, وَمَا أَنصَرْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ وَلَا نَبِيٍّ وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن وَإِن مِّنْ أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ. There is no nation or group of people that a warner has not gone among them. أَنْ أَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. All prophets, the Quran say, the core message of the prophets, worship Allah and avoid Taghut. So it is totally outside of any reason to say that Naskh means that Allah would reveal a basic aqidah of wahdaniyya, like pure monotheistic faith, and then he changes his mind and he say, oh, some other creature also share my divine attributes, so you should also pray to them or pray to me through them. It's just out of impossibility. In the basic core morals, Allah would not reveal to the prophet, for example, that fornication and adultery is fahishatan wa sa'a sabila, and another prophet, you receive a risala that maybe it's okay, or one is okay and the other is not. See what I mean? So fundamental beliefs in Allah, revelation, prophethood, Allah's knowledge, our responsibility as human beings, individual responsibility, the life hereafter, punishment and reward. There's no way of going around this. In other words, if there is anything that was replaced, it may be in certain detailed rules without violation of this basic, I call it core of the mission of all of the prophets. Now we come to something very important really to deal with. You can read for any scholar who gives an opinion. I have held the view always in writing, in lectures, in everything. Before we examine what X or Y scholar said, we go in the proper hierarchy of authority and authenticity of sources, beginning with the Quran, Sunnah, if there is any reference to that, and then of course you can put any opinion or measure them against those definitive value. In the matter of Naskh, there is no more important and relevant than the Quran because it deals with the subject directly. How is the term Naskh? Now everybody knows what I mean by Naskh because I'm just trying to steer away from the English term, just sticking our mind rather than the original term in the Quran. Okay, how it is used in the Quran. In a way, I'm trying to sum up the definition in this one, this simple sentence. But inshallah, we'll get into the ayat that elaborate on this. Notice here, I try to make it as brief as possible and comprehensive at the same time. Naskh means a new revelation, if it is nasikh, if it's something that supersedes something before it. A new revelation giving to a prophet, not only Prophet Muhammad sallallahu to a prophet, that supersedes a previous revelation given to a previous prophet. I.e., when the Quran speaks about ayat, والذكر الحكيم, the book of Musa, Torah is called الذكر. إن الذين كفروا بالذكر لما جاء. يعني the dhikr or revelation or message are all words that connect with revelations. That means a new revelation or message given to a prophet. For example, Prophet Musa taught certain things, some of which might have been meant by Allah to be temporary or punishment for infractions of some of the Israelites. But then Prophet Isa alayhi salam comes and say, all right, now Allah reduced that burden from you. So this is revelation and this is revelation. They're non-contradictory. One came to supersede the other. Now, here is a direct example from the Quran. And the speaker here, obviously, if you read the surah, the context of it is who? Prophet Isa alayhi salam. In addressing the Israelites, he tells them two basic functions of a prophet, and that apply to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam exactly. You find it parallel. First, وَمُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيَّ مِنَ التَّوْرَةِ. I came to confirm what has been revealed before me, that is the Torah of Musa alayhi salam means. وَلِأُحِلَّ لَكُمْ بَعْضَ الَّذِي حُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. And to make lawful unto you some of the things, not anything. They're forbidden from major things that cannot be permissible, but بعض الذي حرم عليكم, some of the things that has been previously forbidden to you. وجئتكم بآية من ربكم فاتقوا الله وأطيعون. There is a cross-reference in the Quran is very helpful, and just something came to my mind this moment even. In Surah Al-Baqarah, I think it's in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبِظُلْمٍ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. Because of inequity on the part of the Israelites, and here it doesn't mean each and every one. The Quran praises the good, condemns those who deviated. So if it says hadu, it doesn't mean all of them, and inshallah we'll come also to the topic of al-am wal-khas. Is everything includes all population in that group, or are there corroborating evidence so that this is directed to some? And since the Quran praises some of the Israelites and even rabbis who used to be very faithful to the faith, it implies automatically that when it says from those Jews, meaning the category that committed those inequities, not that everybody committed inequities. This is just a significant notice to keep in mind. Okay, so going to that corroborating ayah, فَبِظُلْمٍ, because of this inequity, Allah says we forbade them some of the things, meaning food, for example, that has been permitted to them. So they were punished not because what they're eating is haram, but as a way of punishment. And now with the coming of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, not of his own idea, Allah revealed to him, all right, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove that restriction from you. It is still within the broad of halal and haram. Didn't say now you can eat pigs, for example. It's still haram, but it's only good things, permissible, but restricted for punishment. So I hope this is clear. I could go on and on. There are also other shawahid from the Quran to indicate the notion of naskh in that sense. Oh, okay. طيب. Secondly, did I jump? Okay. This is repeated. All right. Okay, I think I might have some slides that went out of order. So let me see. This is your sorter right here?
أنت عايز ترجع للسلايدز كلها؟
Yeah, not all of them. Just
this is the same prophet. The other one was a different prophet.
Oh, yes. Okay, Jazakallah khair. It is so similar to the previous one that I thought that it was a repeated one. A second usage of that in the Quran that refers to a new revelation giving to a prophet that supersede a previous revelation, exactly the same like the fact, given to the same prophet. That means a prophet receives a revelation on a given matter, like drinking. That was the typical example we used before, make it easier to remember. But then a ruling come through the same prophet in his lifetime later on to change that ruling or restrict it. An example of that is quite clear because I think we mentioned casually also in a previous one, but it actually relates quite distinctly to naskh. Just to give you the background, as you know, I think it's coming in the next slide, but I'll come back to it. Okay? If you look at earlier ayat in the Quran about intoxicants in general or narcotics, earlier on, يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. They ask you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, about it says khamr. Khamr means ما خمر العقل, as Umar radiallahu anh defined. It doesn't mean only wine, but anything that beclouds the mind, intoxicant or more narcotic. And maisir, gambling, say in both of them is a great harm or great sin and some benefit for people, like people who trade in them, it's benefit for them. But their harm is greater than their benefit. But it didn't say explicitly it is forbidden. So the Quran began to wean them. In a further stage, it لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. Oh believer, don't come to prayer, to salah, while you're under the influence of any narcotic, so that you can understand what you're saying, which is a further step in the program, the detoxification program, because salawat will come one after the other, so you still can drink after Isha to be sober enough for Fajr prayer. So that reduced the amount. This is exactly what psychologists and physicians recommend to people to kick the habit. But finally, and that's the ayah that is in the previous section, and we say, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر وحاجات تانية كمان والأنصاب والأزلام رجس, uncleanliness, من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. This is in sequence the final ruling on that. So how many naskh have taken place if we take naskh as a changing of rule? 2. Okay? Actually some may say 3, because some refer also to Surah Al-Nahl, that out of this nakhil تتخذون منه سكرا ورزقا حسنا. You make out of this wines or fermented things and good rizq, clean. There is a big argument here whether the Quran simply praised the khamr and say, yeah, it's okay for now, or, as I believe is the better interpretation, that it is not by way of equating khamr and the wholesome thing, but by way of contrast. It might be an earlier notice to people that Allah made you so many beautiful things, like the dates and other fruits and whatever. But you people, some of you use that or abuse it to make intoxicants. Because how could Allah call it rizqan hasan, a part of the rizq hasan, and then say it's haram, it's abomination from amal al-shaytan? No, it is by way of contrast. So some of you abuse it, an earlier one, and you make this, but rizqan hasana, you take the fresh fruit and eat it. Like the grapes. The grapes is beautiful, are beautiful. Some may make wine out of that, some may enjoy it fresh and wholesome fruit. I think this seemed to be more with the total picture that you find in the Quran. Anyway, so, but at least, as you said, there have been two changes here. One superseded the other. The other one, no restriction, okay, except no explicit restriction. There is good, then there is bad, and the bad is more. It doesn't say stop it. But then you get restriction or takhsis, as you call it. Now, no, you come to prayer sober. So that's restricted by implication for most of the day. It's only at night. But now this is the definitive one. So these are like the two meaning in the Quran. Either naskh between a mission or risala of one prophet and the other, not in essentials, or changing of ruling of certain matter. But the answer to that is why. And by now, I think it is quite obvious. Why were these steps taken in prohibition of intoxicant? Because people cannot change. The Quran deals with the reality of people. Some people might say, but why this ayat continued to be there with us in the Quran? Maybe for a certain period of time, because people were so much obsessed with drinking as a way of life, so you can't change it overnight. Everybody would agree with that. Why did these steps, the first two steps, were revealed? Why not cancel them, remove them from the Quran? Allah could say, well, this ayat removed from the Quran. No, the answer is that, yes, it was useful for bringing about a major social change for people who were very, very addictive to drinking. But did that end with the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How about people who enter into the fold of Islam now, in our times? I don't know, a couple of you might be bored to hear that again, but it's a practical example that happened with one of my great friends, university professor, intellectual, committed, activist to Muslim. Says one of his friends, non-Muslim, we, as a friend and colleague in the university, learned about Islam, admired Islam so much, I told him I really would like to be Muslim. Everything is fine with me. So his friend asked him, do you drink? He said, oh yeah, I can't do without drink. He says, no, you can't be a Muslim unless you stop drinking. The person was very sad and grieved. And he said, I really would love to be a Muslim, but all of my life I've been used to that. I can't kick the habit. So that brother also was grieved. He said he was just one inch away from entering into Islam. He could have taken Shahada at the same time. So he asked me, what do you think, Brother Jamal? Was I wrong? Am I not obligated as a Muslim تقول الحق ولا تخشى في الله لومة لائم, to say the truth and don't care about anyone who doesn't feel happy about what you say? And this is the truth. Did I not say the truth? I said, my dear brother, I have close relationship with him. We were working together in the early days of MSA and all of this. I said, brother, you said the truth but in the wrong way. He said, what do you mean? I tell him, for you, it's no. I said, no, you cannot reverse this final ayah. It's in. You cannot change the law of Allah. He said, but how? I said, you tell him, all right, I'd just like to tell you honestly, Paul, that Islam prohibits drinking, but that does not prohibit you from becoming a Muslim. And I'm not doing that just to please you, because that happened also in the early days of Islam. But if you have the determination that gradually, as Allah will help you, but you have the intent to eventually get rid of that drinking. I told him, what do you think? He was a little bit, but I told him, all right, if you still have any doubt, suppose Paul, your friend, who was just an inch from accepting Islam, dies that night. Will be he potentially, because Allah knows, in trouble in the hereafter? He said, yes, as far as we know. He said, if he dies that night, if you told him the answer I humbly suggested to you, okay, and he died the same night, and the wine was in his stomach even when he died, okay, would he have a chance? He said, I'm not so sure. I'll tell you, the Quran will make you so sure. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah will never forgive حاجة واحدة بس, that anyone associate others with him. And meaning also, not eventually, some of the Sahaba were mushrikeen. No, dies after knowledge of the truth, insisting on shirk, like Abu Lahab, who was even more knowledgeable of the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the only one exempted. But anything short of that will be forgiven. And anything, include drinking. I'm not saying you encourage him to drink. So this is one issue that I feel is, I hope, a convincing answer. Why weren't these initial ayat removed, so that we just have the final ruling? So the ruling is there, it's final, but the ayat is there to teach us in individual cases, not to reverse the law and say, no, no, all Muslims, let us begin with فيه إثم كبير ومنافع. Today, inshallah, and for the next few years, we'll choose the first ayah that there is harm and benefit, and the harm is great, but it doesn't say haram. Okay, and maybe 15 years later, if the people are still alive, okay, لا تقربوا الصلاة, just drink, but be sure to be sober when you come to prayer. You don't change the law, but you deal with the application of the law in a gradual, smooth way, and what's the Quran actually taught us. Can you see the distinction between changing and reversing versus hikmah and putting first things first? All right. I have another example, but I might give you a rain check for another time, because today our time is short. Maghrib is 7, so inshallah we hope to meet this requirement, at least finish the topic. There are various views about naskh. There are some scholars, classical scholars, who went to one extreme of claiming that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ayat in the Quran that has been abrogated. One of the most unacceptable reasoning is that they say, for example, all the ayat in the Quran that talks about good treatment of non-Muslims, لا ينهاكم الله, people who are coexisting with you peacefully, you treat them in kindness, and this, ادفع بالتي هي أحسن, the kindness to your neighbor, والجار الجنب, even who's not a Muslim that you don't know. All of that has been cancelled by the so-called ayat al-sayf, the verse of sword. There is nothing called verse of the sword. It transforms the impression of the Quran as coming with the sword rather than the hidayah and attraction to the hearts of people, even if they're not believer at the time. But what is even more irrational to me is that they differed as to what is the ayat this verse of the sword. Is it the one in Surah Al-Tawbah? Is it the one in Surah Al-Fath? So they even don't agree. There is no such thing. Look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He never used the term, this ayah of the sword. So with all due respect to scholars, their ijtihad, they're not above the Quran, they're not above the Prophet ﷺ, who never used such a kind of term. So it is, if you adopt that kind of thinking, you would say, you can get 100, 150, there are dozens of ayat in the Quran that speak about kindness to non-believers in Islam, even if they reject Islam, so long as they're not hurting you. How could it be? So that was a form of exaggeration that is totally unjustified. But there are also people who went almost to the other extreme. But I'll tell you that those people would be less dangerous for one reason. We'll come to that. They say there is no real naskh in the Quran. Abdul Muta'al al-Jabri, alayhi rahmatullah, he used to be an imam also in New York. He wrote a book, and the title of the book, La Naskha fil Quran. There is no naskh. So there is a school also that say there is no naskh in the Quran. But they're right only in some respects. But I have reservation about the categorical denial that there is no naskh in the Quran. One, this particular book, he did a very good job in showing that what people thought was naskh or replacement of ruling are reconcilable with the other ayat. Example, some people claimed that in the beginning the fasting was optional. When the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, he encouraged people to fast, for example, the day of Ashura, or Tasu'a and Ashura, or Ashura and Hadashura, or two of them, or three. There are various. Anyway, but the particular Ashura. And the occasion that he asked, he found the Jews fasting that day. So he asked why they fasted that day. He was told, because this is the date that Allah saved Musa alayhi salam and his followers from the tyranny of Fir'aun. Is that bad? It is not bad. Let's not keep the politics of the injustices done to Palestinians aside. And we're talking here about, a religious practice, about a great prophet. And that's why the Prophet said, نحن أولى بموسى منهم. We even are closer to Musa than they are, and ordered Muslims to fast the day of Ashura. Okay? So they say that has been cancelled or superseded or nusikh when the ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah came with the mandatory fasting of Ramadan. Are these necessarily, or is that a case of abrogation? Is it? Those who said that, they ignore a basic rule in defining naskh itself. You see, the scholarship definition of naskh, استبدال بحكم غيره في فترة لاحقة ففي نفس الموضوع. That means naskh happens on exactly the same topic, one preceding the other. So the preceded one is mansukh and the later one is nasikh. But is it the same topic? No. Ashura is a voluntary fasting. Ramadan is an obligatory fasting. They don't really change, or both of them are valid in their area. If you look at the tatawwa, optional siyam, Ashura is still continuing. It has not been removed even as a sunnah fast. Ramadan did not change it. Ramadan added to that the requirement of the fasting of the month. Secondly, they also say that in the early days of Islam, the Quran spoke about charity to the poor. Okay? But then they say this was nusikh, abrogated or changed with the zakah, the decree of zakah as an obligatory duty on Muslims, not only in the Quran, in the Hadith. Remember Sheikh Abdullah, Jazawullah Khairan, we mentioned the Bunya al-Islam ala khams, it's one of the pillars of Islam. And in terms of hierarchy, interesting, it comes immediately after Tawheed, before fasting and before Hajj. Tawheed, after Tawheed. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ elaborated about the amounts of zakah and various assets. So they say zakah then abrogated. Did it abrogate it? No. Because zakah became the minimum required mandatory part on the Muslim on zakatable assets every year, without getting into the details that had basic ruling. The voluntary zakah is still there. No wonder we find evidence even in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Inna fil mali haqqan sawa zakah," that there is also a claim in property or assets beyond zakah. That means, for example, if there is great need of the community, that the amount of zakah is not enough, they say a just ruler can impose additional amount, even though you don't call it zakah, because zakah is zakah, period. Yani levies, you might say, to meet the needs of the community. Furthermore, some people, again, those who say the sword, the verse of the sword, and they say ayat, some of the ayat that it cancelled. Of course, the ayah will come to later in details, inshallah, that people cut in the middle, the ayah in the middle of the surah, in disregard to other ayat, and they love to quote, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم وَخُذُوهُم وَاحْصُرُوهُم وَاقْعُدُوا لَهُمْ كُلَّ مَرْصَدٍ وَلَيْسَ في القرآن سوى هذا. يعني كأنه take the believers, this is not even the beginning of the ayah, but even if you begin, it doesn't change the mistaken interpretation. Seize the non-believers, even though this is a bad translation. We'll talk about that later. Seize the non-believers, kill the non-believers, and seize them and wait for them in every ambush. And some people even would love to stop at اقتلوا المشركين and mistranslate the word mushrikeen into kuffar, which is not the. So kill the non-believers. Anyone who's not a Muslim, يعني it's a free and fair game. Anyway, and unfortunately, they say that this ayah abrogated the ayah about peaceful coexistence, even though both are Madanis. Anyway, in Surah Al-Mumtahina, which is definitely a Madani surah, because speak about women who migrated to Muslims in Medina after. You have to be careful also in terms of the historical sequence if information is there. The ayah of peaceful coexistence, Allah does not forbid you with respect to those who are not fighting you because of your religion, driving you out of your home, that you should deal with them in kindness and justice. So they say, no, that's cancelled. So anything that speak about kindness to a non-believer, this is watering down Islam, this is modernizing Islam, this is the influence of corrupting American culture on some intellectual Muslim. Oh, astaghfirullah. Anyway, طيب. Let's get into the school I believe in terms of interpretation, is that there are incidents of superstition in the Quran, but very, very few. And even if that exists, like the case of prohibition of drinking, it is not cancelling that there is benefit and harm in khamr. It is not cancelling and removing the rule that when you come to prayer you should not be intoxicated, but to move from one stage to the other, because it is a necessity for stable social change to the better, or detox in the case of drinking or drugs. Okay? Also, just I mentioned something very quick, that may have been subject to nasakh. When the Prophet ﷺ was sent, there was a custom among the Arabs that their adopted children had exactly the same share in inheritance like blood children. And that was so much of a tribal belief that it was very difficult to change until in the 33rd surah in the Quran, Al-Ahzab, it cancelled this notion of adoption. You can be kind. It allowed fostering, but not adoption, that you give your name, your false identity to the child, and that he shares your blood children the same share in inheritance. You can give them within the limited wasiyah that does not exceed the third. But in other words, the ruling was changed. So that also might have been a case like that. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ, the text of the Quran, وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, that those who are related by rahim, by relationship, marital or descent relationship, they are more entitled to this without cruelty to the others, of course, but they determine the law. Anyway, I go on this one rather not very fast, because sometimes they confuse Muslims with it. Some people keep digging in the writing of early scholars who never claimed perfection or infallibility, and they keep dwelling on that. But I'll expose to you, because like I said, the course actually in essence it was an academic course. Some say that there are three types of supersession or naskh. One is to cancel the recitation, so it's no longer part of the Quran, and the legal ruling. Think of it. You cancel the ruling, okay, and cancel even the recitation. How? Either Allah tells the Prophet, don't recite this anymore, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decide to make every Muslim who memorized that ayah forget it. Okay? Just think of it. The second, to cancel the recitation, so the verse is no longer in the Quran, but the legal ruling continues. If the legal ruling is continuing, what is the sense of removing it from the Quran? You get the point? On the contrary, the legal ruling takes its strength if anybody argues by saying, no, the Quran says this is the ruling. Okay? And I'll give you an example after I give you the third one. Again, it's this category. Cancellation of the legal ruling, but not the recitation. Like what? We're talking about that now? Okay? At one time, the legal ruling about drinking, it's okay so long as you come to prayer sober. So this is a superseding legal ruling. And it is there in recitation also. So people can understand how this teaching of Allah evolved for their own benefit and to benefit also by it from the field. That's why I'm saying I have my severe doubt, even though most books on the ulum al-Quran, sciences of the Quran mention these. Like you say, I don't see much sense of keeping a legal ruling and remove it. And I'm not aware of anything in the sound hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who came to tell people, okay, all those who memorize this ayah, remove it, because the recitation is abrogated, but not the ruling. There is no report that I know of to support that. Can Allah make all people forget it? Yes, Allah is able to, but that's again a speculative type of question. Allah is able to do anything. But if you have to take the corroborating evidence, you can't take a speculative issue like that and make it really justify something that doesn't make sense Islamically or in terms of legal ruling. The second one, of course, I criticized it already. That a ruling is there, but the recitation, the text is not in the Quran, but the ruling is there. meaning a ruling instead of being based on the book of Allah that has been preserved meticulously. There is no evidence for that, and if people forget it, it is gone. At least if some people forget, they can go back to the Quran. I'll give you a frank example of that. I didn't want to get into that detail, but it was reported. And that is called hadith ahad. You know, some ahadiths are narrated by Sahaba, one Sahabi who was adl. We don't raise any question. But nobody else, you know, or a few. But if it's an important matter, it should be a large number of people aware of that. It is reported that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh says, warning people, let's just translate it in simple words. He says, I'm afraid that with the passage of time, people forget that the stoning of the adulterer is not in the Quran. Okay? But footnote here. You know, of course, the punishment of adultery is different from fornication. Even for those who, fornication, person who has not been married, and again, the definition of muhsan, that never married or has married already before, it doesn't matter. Yani, that's different from someone who's married and connects. Of course, the Arabic word zina, but in English here, of course, they use the terms fornication for non-married. Anyway, and he says that there was among what was revealed in the Quran, and listen carefully, especially those who know Arabic. وَالشَّيْخُ وَالشَّيْخَةُ إِذَا زَنَيَا فَارْجُمُوهُمَا الْبَتَّةَ بِمَا كَسَبَ مِنَ اللَّذَّةِ وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Allah Alim al-Hakim. Which, if I translate it roughly, what does it mean? وَالشَّيْخ وَالشَّيْخِ. The old man and old woman. The word shaykh doesn't mean very old, by the way. But yani, mature, old man. If shaykh or shaykh, an old man and woman, if they commit adultery, so stone them both to death by virtue of this forbidden ladha or enjoyment that they had. Wallahu sami'. The only thing that sounds to me like Quran, Wallahu sami'un alim, and appear in many surahs, Wallahu azizun hakim. How many of you, by show of hand, know Arabic? In some degree or that, by show of hands. One only? Those who know Arabic. Two only? Anyone else? Three? Four? Don't feel shy? Five? Does that sound like Quran? Anyone who's familiar with the style of the Quran, does that sound like the Quran? You see, the Bulagha al-Arab, some of the eloquent people in Arabia, who even were not Muslim, it was reported one woman, Jazakumullah khairan, barakallah. I take one only. Jazakumullah. I remember a story, but I don't remember the details, just came to me now. That one woman who's not a Muslim, but she was very eloquent, and she heard a Muslim recite a section or ayah from the Quran, and she didn't know Quran, of course, she didn't believe in it. He said, no, it cannot be the Quran. There was just the reputation of the Quran as the top level of eloquence, the criteria for any eloquence. He said, and he found that she was right. He made a slight mistake. It doesn't sound like the Quran. Does it sound like the Quran to you who know Arabic? Secondly, there is a major legal error here, because the differentiation of, if you take it, by the way, there are some people like Sheikh Abu Zahra, alayhi rahmatullah, raised some question about even the question of stoning. This is a big issue, controversial one. He never even gave his opinion clearly, except to a few select people shortly before his death. And I heard from those witnesses, one of them, and he said, I'm afraid that I go to my grave without saying that truth, that I was afraid if I speak openly, you know, of course, hell would turn against him and he would be accused of all kind of things. But he said this is amana of the scholar. But I'm not getting into that. I'd like to get more information on it. But in any case, for those who take the traditional interpretation, the question of flagellation, okay, or stripping of the one who's not married, fornication, and the stoning is not age. What is it then? You said that only. The differentiation in punishment is based on age? No. No. A young man who was married, عندي مية الله يكفيك. A young man, أغرقتموني بكرمكم. Drowned me in your generosity, not only in tamr but all the water. Barakallahu fik. But this is not a monopoly like some of the rulers who want to keep everything and even take the things from you. All right. Astaghfirullah. May Allah guide them and help them stop the evil they're doing. Anyway, so legally, that doesn't make sense. And an old man who has not married before also would not be stoned to death. So it raises very serious problem, and a matter that relates to life and death, and only Umar radiallahu anh is the narrator. This is not a question about his integrity, but there were cases where some Sahaba would be confused in a given matter. Umar radiallahu anh was confused also about some aspect of riba and the definition of various types of riba. They never claimed infallibility. If it is the Prophet ﷺ who said that, khalas, then we try to understand it. All right. So this is my conclusion, that there have been exaggeration. Now, I'd like to cover in the last part, as time is catching with us, the ayat that are referring to naskh in the Quran. We kept talking about naskh, naskh, naskh. It appeared in 4 ayat in the Quran. And when you review it carefully, both in terms of text that usually I highlight in gold in the key words, and also in context, you find that they're not all even dealing about naskh as people understood it, at least the first 3. The first meaning or first usage of is to keep a record of deeds. هذا كتابنا أي القرآن ينطق عليكم بالحق إنا كنا نستنسخه. Derivative from the same root of نسخ. إنا كنا نستنسخ ما كنتم تعملون. Meaning what? This is our book, the Quran. Our record speaks all truth, for verily we have caused to be recorded, meaning by angels, all that you ever did. Is that changing rules? Nothing to do with it. نستنسخ. See, that's why the value of always going the Quran, the value of finding the root of the Quranic terms and find how they were used in the Quran, has nothing to do with naskh in the tradition. The second meaning writing the Torah, speaking about Musa alayhi salam. ولما سكت عن موسى الغضب أخذ الألواح, the tablet, Torah يعني, وفي نسختها هدى ورحمة للذين هم لربهم يرهبون. And when Musa's wrath was stilled, he took up the tablets مكتوب عليها التوراة, in the writing of which في نسختها, طبعا in Arabic and English the word استنسخ راحت, but this is the meaning. Writing, meaning wrote upon these tablets. Okay. The third usage in the Quran is a very controversial one, but I say it briefly because there have been a lot of mileage made by some Orientalists on that, and they make a claim that when the Prophet ﷺ was talking to the mushrikeen Arabian times and the Meccan period, أفرأيتم اللات والعزى ومناة الثالثة الأخرى. Have you seen Lat and Uzza and Manat? These were idols worshipped by the Qurashites and the Arabs. The correct ending, as we find in the Quran, ومناة الثالثة ألكم الذكر وله الأنثى. because they call these like that the daughters of Allah, and they say, to you, you attribute yourselves the sons, and to Allah you attribute the daughters. Okay? Has nothing to do with Nasr. But then they claim that when the Prophet ﷺ was reciting أفرأيتم اللات والعزى ومناة الثالثة الأخرى, they say that Shaitan caused the Prophet to recite تلك الغرانيق العلا وإن شفاعتهن لترتجى. These are the highest, objects of worship, and their intercession is to be hoped. That the Prophet said that. But then they say the Quran proves it because of this ayah. But before I get to this ayah, when you take ayat in the Quran about the Quran and how it is revealed to the prophets, okay? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala عالم الغيب فلا يظهر على غيبه أحد. Allah is the knowledgeable, the one who's knowledgeable fully and completely of the unseen. And He does not reveal any of these secrets to His servants إلا من ارتضى من رسول. So the context here is not any ideas or opinions or events. It refers to the message, the prophetic message. إلا من ارتضى من رسول أي الوحي, except any prophet or apostle that He chooses. With what does it say after that? فإنه يسلك من بين يديه ومن خلفه رصدا ليعلم أن قد أبلغوا رسالات ربهم وأحاط بما لديهم وأحصى كل شيء عددا. جزاك الله خير. Except Allah revealed this secret or the knowledge or the wahy to the prophets that He chooses, and when He sent the he is protected from before and from back. It means there is no shaitan that can ever get to him when he's reciting the Quran. Why? So that Allah makes sure that they convey the message of their Lord, i.e. So that ayah in principle, even though it doesn't come in this context, even in a different context altogether, that the basic rule that it is impossible that the Prophet will utter any falsehood. And we know from other evidence we discussed early in that course, very early in the first topic, that the Prophet ﷺ used to hasten with the Quran because he was afraid of forgetting any word of it. And the Quran assured him, لا تحرك به لسانك, don't move your tongue, to hasten with the Quran. So there's more than one evidence. There's just an impossibility that Allah would let that happen to the Prophet. It is perhaps a story of the so-called zanadiqa, people sometimes pretending even to be Muslims and try to destroy Islam from within. So let's look at this ayah. And let's look also at the terminology that they have mistranslated, even though it is viable translation lexically, but not contextually. I'll come to that issue also when we talk about the rules of tafsir. All right. Did I read that to you? Did I read it? No? وما أرسلنا من قبلك أي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم من رسول ولا نبي إلا إذا, هنا كلمة تمنى, ألقى الشيطان في أمنيته, and there is a reading أمنيته. Both are acceptable قراءات. فينسخ الله ما يلقي الشيطان. That's where the word نسخ came. ثم يحكم الله آياته والله عليم حكيم. The translation here that I got from Muhammad Asad, because it was easily available from the internet, I didn't have time to edit it, but I'll put it as is and make a critique when needed. Allah says, whenever we sent forth any apostle or prophet before you, and you refers to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was hoping, that's correct. Tamanna also means hope. When he's hoping Muhammad Asad was quite correct in this, in having this interpretive statement that his warning would be heeded, that people will accept the message. Every prophet hoped that his people will accept. Satan would cast an aspersion on his innermost aim. So shaitan is putting obstacle, actually some translated obstacle by making doubts in the mind of people or whatever other tricks to divert people from the truth. So it frustrates or put an obstacle before the acceptance of the teaching of the Prophet. But it says, by Allah render null and void whatever aspersion Satan may cast, and Allah makes his message clear, and by themselves, for Allah is all known. So the whole argument really on the word أمنية, because وتمنى, أمنية وتمنى ممكن meaning recite. Some people wanted to be translated this way to prove this false story of Gharaniq. Okay? So they say, except if he recites, ألقى الشيطان في أمنيته, the shaitan would throw something in his recitation, either making, by the way, which could mean either that the Prophet recite that, or shaitan recite that in the ears of the mushrikeen, which is another possibility. So is it umniya or umniya? And if it is recitation and contradicts all this evidence from the Quran, then obviously it may be correct translation lexically, but far from contextually. I know it's a little bit too difficult to go through it that quickly. The final ayah, here we find the only one that speak about naskh of an ayah, the only one in the Quran. Naskh and ayah in the same ayah. That's in the Surah Al-Baqarah. ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. One observation here. There is another qira'ah for this, for ننسها. The qira'ah says ننسئها, and ننسئها come from what? نسي, نؤجلها. Just keep that in mind. ننسئها may cause it to be forgotten, or ننسئها عليكم الأذان. Okay. Okay. خلاص إن شاء الله. So that just 1 minute to finish. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. That means actually a revelation or a message from the Prophet. If Allah replace it with a letter, it is at least as is and is superior, and that you can find actually in the context of this ayah. So maybe we stop at that. In the next time we may have just a few minutes to catch up with this and continue. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. And sorry brothers, you should have brought it to our attention. We didn't hear any azan. Tomorrow and next